Hey gang, Dr. G, Imaginarium. Now, on this channel, I've been talking a lot about identity and how to find it. I know that's a big problem that a lot of folks are struggling with, particularly young folks in our current society today. I got an interesting thing to share with you. I'm going to be talking about the work of Robin Fivush, a psychologist who's, for the last 20 years, she and her colleagues have been working on autobiographical memory and the way that we put together our stories about ourselves and about our past. Now, an interesting thing that she's found about this is that there seems to be a very strong correlation between the types of stories that we tell about our parents, our intergenerational stories, and our own sense of well being. Now, it's well known that those people out there who can tell a coherent story and narrative tend to do better in terms of well being. What maybe might be surprising to you is that there is a connection between particular kinds of stories that people tell and how they uh, feel about themselves and their sense of identity in place. Now, I've talked elsewhere on my channel in other videos about the importance of identity. So, what they found is that individuals, especially adolescents, who knew more stories about their parents and their grandparents' lives, their parents' childhoods, for example, and could tell them in greater detail, showed better self esteem, lower anxiety, and a higher sense of meaning and purpose. Now, those are all things that we're frequently talking about, and it's definitely something that a lot of people are struggling with. And what I've found is that there's a whole lot of chatter about this in a vague sense, but there's not a whole lot of real world practical work as far as like, okay, how do I do this exactly? Interesting thing about this is that intergenerational narratives were more effective at providing these benefits than personal or friend stories were. People who are able to tell their parents' childhood stories seem to have stronger benefits in these areas. This is observed cross culturally in the studies that Fivush and her group carried out. They saw this effect in those of European descent, those of Chinese descent, and those of Maori descent. And also, it's more effective if you are able to connect yourself to those stories. Like you may say, well, I get my sense of philosophical awe and wonder from my mother, which is true. I also get my passion for the sciences from my father. You know, I can do that. That's also true. And those kind of links showed greater benefits if you tended to tell a story in that way. This effect was more powerful if you were able to link yourself to the stories themselves too. As like I learned my lesson about the joys of adventure by flying with my father on when he was a flight instructor, for example. Intergenerational stories linked more strongly to the sense of self and identity than friend stories did also. So why does this work anyway? Well, I think there's a number of reasons. One is that the past is not just the past. It's not just ancient history. The past actually lives in the present. One's roots contain the raw material of one's identity, and connecting yourself to things outside of yourself is the thing I talk about all the time as a way to build identity. If you don't know who you are, if you don't know what it is or what your place is, this is the type of work you should try to do if you can. Now, what about the family where it was a toxic or abusive type of family situation? Well, that's when it gets more complex and it gets much more difficult. I would say in this instance, if you're one of those folks, don't underestimate how difficult this can be to do. And yet at the same time, make sure that you realize that it is very important to do this kind of work, to figure out how I'm going to use those terrible experiences as a way to build my identity. Because what you can't do is just pretend like it didn't happen. That doesn't work. Rather, I would strongly suggest connecting with a therapist or someone who you deeply trust and is very wise to help you with this. And recognize it's not black and white either. In our culture, I think narratives that we hear growing up are really just frivolous nonsense for the most part. It's created by advertising and 5-second long fads and just a bunch of junk. So unlike other cultures where narratives and family stories and things tend to be passed down through generations, is something that we don't really do that much. So that means that, as per the usual, the individual has to bear the burden of all of this work, for better or for worse. Here we are, so this is what we have to do. I think, though, that it is extremely important to do it. We all should, if we can, I think, try to work on this. Your story, your legend, if you will, is in a very real sense you. So that's what I got for you today. There's a link down below to Dr. Fivush's really fascinating work. Don't forget to give this video a like, and subscribe if you like this stuff. Check out ericgoodwyn.com. Jump on the newsletter list, and find out about all the other shenanigans that I've been up to lately. Until then, see you next time on Mental Health Mondays.